He left because he thought she deserved better. She spent 2 years proving him wrong. The letter was 3 lines long. Tessa Greer read it standing at the kitchen table in the house that still smelled like him. Boot leather and pine soap, and the faint sweetness of the tobacco he rolled but rarely smoked. The handwriting was careful. Each letter formed with the deliberate precision of a man who had learned to write late and never quite trusted his own hand. Tessa, you deserve a man who can give you what I can't. I am sorry for the rest of my life. Hollister. She read it twice. She folded it. She put it in the pocket of her apron. Then she sat down in the chair he had built with his own hands and stared at the wall for a very long time. Hollister Crane had been gone since before dawn. She knew because the bed had been cold when she woke, and his saddlebags were missing from the hook by the door, and the bay mare was gone from the corral. He had left quietly, the way he did everything, without fuss, without argument, without giving her the chance to talk him out of it. She should have seen it coming. The accident at the lumber camp had taken his right leg below the knee 4 months ago, and since then he had become a different man. Not angry. Hollister did not do anger. Instead, he had turned inward, quiet and unreachable, sitting on the porch for hours with his whittling knife and a piece of pine, carving nothing, just shaving the wood down to splinters. He could not ride. He could not work the timber claim. He could not do the 100 small physical tasks that had defined him as a man, and the loss of them had hollowed him out like a gourd scraped clean. She had tried to reach him. She had told him it did not matter, that she had married him and not his leg, that they would find a way. She had sat beside him on the porch and read to him from the newspaper when the silence grew too heavy. She had adjusted the furniture so he could move through the house without catching the crutch on the table legs. She had learned to do the things he could no longer do: shoeing the horse, climbing the ladder to patch the roof, hauling the crosscut saw through timber, without making a show of it, because she knew that every task she took over was another small wound to a man whose identity was built on what his body could do. But Hollister Crane was a proud man, and pride, she was learning, could be more destructive than any saw blade. He had decided he was a burden, and once that idea took root, nothing she said could pull it out. She watched it happen the way a person watches a river undercut a bank, slowly, inevitably, the ground crumbling a little more each day, until one morning you wake up and the whole thing has collapsed. And now he was gone. Tessa stood up from the chair and walked to the window. The morning light was coming through the glass in long, pale bars, and the timber claim stretched out beyond the yard, stumps and slash piles, and the raw red earth where Hollister had been clearing before the accident. Beyond that, the mountains rose dark and blue against the sky, and somewhere in those mountains, on some trail she could not see, a one-legged man was riding away from the only person who had ever loved him without condition. She pulled the letter from her apron pocket and read it one more time. You deserve a man who can give you what I can't. You don't get to decide that, she said to the empty room. She did not go after him that day. She wanted to. Every muscle in her body was tensed for it, coiled like a spring, but she was smart enough to know that chasing a man in the first hours of his leaving would only push him deeper into the wilderness. Hollister needed to run. He needed to feel the distance growing between them, needed to sit alone in the dark and taste what he had given up. Only then would the running lose its power. So she waited. She fed the chickens. She milked the cow. She split firewood and stacked it against the house. And she repaired the fence rail that Hollister had been meaning to fix for 3 weeks. And she did all of it with the letter in her pocket like a hot coal she could not put down. She stood at the window at midday and looked at the mountains, and allowed herself, for exactly 5 minutes, to feel the full weight of what had happened. She let it sit on her chest, the abandonment, the helplessness, the fury at being left behind by a man who thought leaving was the same as loving. Then she wiped her eyes on her sleeve and set the feeling aside, because she had work to do, and grief was a luxury she could not afford. Not yet. Not until she had him back. That evening, she sat at the table and wrote her own letter. Not to Hollister. She did not know where he was. She wrote to his brother Owen in Boise, and to the sawyer at the lumber camp, and to the postmaster in every town within 100 miles of their claim. The same message. copied out 5 times in her careful schoolteacher's script. If Hollister Crane passes through, tell him his wife is waiting. Don't tell him I asked. Then she went to bed and lay awake until dawn, listening to the silence where his breathing used to be. The first year was the hardest. Not because of the work. Tessa had grown up on a hardscrabble farm in eastern Oregon and knew how to swing an axe, mend a harness, and butcher a hog. The work was familiar, even comforting, a rhythm she could lose herself in when the loneliness pressed too close. The hardest part was the not knowing. Was he alive? Was he hurt? Had he found work somewhere, made a new life, forgotten her? The questions circled endlessly, and she had no answers. Only the stubborn certainty that she was right, and he was wrong, and that certainty had to be enough. She kept the timber claim going. She could not fell the big trees alone, but she cleared brush, hauled slash, and sold firewood to the mining camp 12 miles down the valley. She traded eggs and butter at the mercantile in town. She took in mending from the ranchers' wives, and on Saturday evenings, she played piano at the church social for 50 cents and a plate of supper. People talked, of course. A woman alone on a timber claim was an oddity, and the town of Briar Fork had opinions about it. Mrs. Halstead at the dry goods store told her gently that she should consider the marriage dissolved and look for a new husband. The minister suggested she pray for acceptance. Emmett Griggs, who owned the sawmill, offered to buy the claim outright, and when she refused, he offered to marry her, which she also refused, though less politely. The schoolteacher, Miss Rollins, was the only person in town who seemed to understand. She brought Tessa a jar of blackberry preserves one afternoon and sat with her on the porch and said, "The women in this town think you're stubborn. I think you're the strongest person I've ever met." "I'm not strong," Tessa said. "I'm just too angry to quit." Miss Rollins laughed. "Same thing, far as I can tell." "He's not coming back, Mrs. Crane," Emmett said, standing in her yard with his hat in his hands. "Then I'll go get him," she said. "But not yet." In the 14th month, she got word. Not from any of her letters. From a freight driver who had stopped to water his mules at her creek. He had seen a one-legged man working as a night watchman at a mining company in Silver Falls, 3 days' ride north. Quiet fellow, kept to himself, walked with a crutch made from an ash branch. Tessa thanked the driver, gave him a meal, and went inside to think. She did not leave immediately. She spent 2 weeks preparing, preserving food, arranging for the neighbor's son to tend the animals, packing her saddlebags with care. She was not going to Silver Falls to beg. She was going to Silver Falls to have a conversation, and she intended to arrive looking like a woman who had been doing just fine without him, because she had been. The ride took 3.5 days. Silver Falls was a mining town wedged into a narrow canyon, all mud and noise, and the constant clang of stamp mills crushing ore. She found the mining company office on the main street and asked for Hollister Crane. The clerk looked at her blankly. "Night watchman," she said. "Tall, one leg, walks with a crutch." "Oh, him. He goes by Crane, know why. Stays in the bunkhouse behind the assay office." She walked through the town slowly, taking in the mud streets and the miners, and the general air of exhaustion that hung over everything like chimney smoke. This was where he had ended up. This cramped, noisy canyon, surrounded by strangers, doing work that required nothing of him except the ability to stay awake through the night. She thought of the timber claim, the clean air, the mountains, the silence that was vast and open rather than cramped and suffocating, and her anger, which had sustained her for 2 years, suddenly shifted into something softer and more painful. He had not just left her, he had exiled himself. She found the bunkhouse at dusk. It was a low, sagging building, with a tin roof and a single window. She knocked on the door and waited, and when it opened, Hollister was standing there in the lamplight, thinner than she remembered, with shadows under his eyes, and his hair grown long and unkempt, and the crutch wedged under his right arm, like a third limb he had grown accustomed to. He stared at her. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. "You look terrible," she said. "Tessa, don't." She held up her hand. "Don't say you're sorry. Don't say I shouldn't have come, and don't you dare say I deserve better. I've had 2 years to think about what I deserve, and I've decided it's you." He leaned against the doorframe. She watched the war play out across his face. Shame fighting with relief. Pride fighting with longing. The stubborn conviction that he was right, crumbling under the weight of seeing her standing in his doorway after riding 3 days to find him. "I can't work the claim," he said. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "I can't ride timber. I can't do what I used to do." "I know." "Then what?" "You can keep books. You can sharpen tools. You can mend harness and build furniture and do the 100 things that need doing on a timber claim that don't require 2 legs. She stepped closer. "You can sit on the porch with me in the evening and tell me about your day. And you can sleep in our bed instead of a bunkhouse that smells like lamp oil and regret." He looked at her as if she were speaking a language he had forgotten. She watched the words land, each one a small detonation behind his eyes, blowing apart the careful structure of self-pity and sacrifice he had built to justify his absence. "You kept the claim," he said. "It was not a question. Every acre, every tree. I sold firewood to the mining camp, took in mending, played piano at the church social. I did what needed doing." She paused. "The way you taught me." He closed his eyes. She saw his jaw tighten, and she saw the crutch tremble under his arm, and she saw the exact moment the fight went out of him. Not defeat, but surrender, which was something different entirely. Surrender required trust, and trust required believing that the person in front of you knew what they were asking for. "I left because I love you," he said. "I know," she said. "That's the stupidest reason I've ever heard." He laughed. It was a broken, ragged sound, more sob than laughter, and it was the most beautiful thing she had heard in 2 years. They left Silver Falls the next morning. Hollister rode the bay mare. She had brought his horse, knowing he would need it, knowing that the act of riding his own horse home would matter to him, in ways she could articulate, but he could not. She rode beside him on the buckskin she had borrowed from the neighbor, and for the first day they did not talk much. The silence between them was different now, not the empty silence of absence, but the full silence of 2 people relearning how to occupy the same space. On the second evening, camped beside a creek in a grove of aspens, he told her about the months after he left. The drinking, which he had stopped after 6 weeks because it made the pain in his leg worse. The odd jobs, stable hand, dishwasher, night watchman, each one a step further from the man he had been. The nights when he lay awake and thought about her, and talked himself out of going back, over and over, because he believed the story he had told himself about being a burden. "I was wrong," he said, staring into the fire. "Yes, you were. You could have moved on." "I could have. I chose not to." She looked at him across the fire. "That's what marriage is, Hollister. It's choosing, every day. And you don't get to take my choice away from me, because you've decided you know better." He was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. The aspens whispered overhead. "I won't leave again," he said. "I know you won't," she said. "Because if you do, I'll find you faster next time." They reached the timber claim on the 4th day, in late afternoon, when the light was gold and the mountains were sharp against the sky. The house was exactly as she had left it. Clean, stocked, the firewood stacked high against the wall, the fence mended, the garden weeded. She had made sure of that. She wanted him to come home to a place that was whole, so he could see that wholeness did not depend on him alone. Hollister stood in the yard with his crutch and looked at the house, the barn, the timber claim stretching up the slope behind them. She watched him take it in, all the work she had done, all the evidence of the 2 years she had spent keeping their life intact while he tried to give it away. "You did all this," he said. "I did." He turned to her, and his eyes were bright, and he reached out and pulled her to him with his free arm, and he held her against his chest with the crutch braced against the ground, and his face buried in her hair, and he did not let go for a long time. That evening they sat on the porch together, the porch he had built, on the chairs he had made, and watched the last light drain from the sky. His hand found hers on the armrest, and his fingers closed around hers, and the calluses on his palm were rougher than she remembered, but the grip was the same. 2 years, he said quietly. 2 years. she agreed. The mountains darkened. The first stars appeared, and Tessa Crane leaned her head against her husband's shoulder and closed her eyes, and the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of everything they had survived, everything they had chosen, everything that was still ahead.